This was a special win for Bayern Munich, not only because it was their 16th consecutive win of the season against their toughest opponent so far, but because of the way they adapted against PSG. But to understand why this win was so impressive, we need to break it down into three key phases. The first half dominance and the brilliant defensive trick used by Kompany, the turning point with Luis Díaz's red card, and how Bayern Munich survived the second half PSG onslaught with a hybrid low block. So let's start with their early dominance. Bayern took control of this game from the first minute, and while they've been one of the most impressive teams in possession so far this season, the real winner for them in this game was the way they defended. Both PSG and Bayern looked to press aggressively in a man-marking system, but there's a reason why it worked so well for Bayern in this game and not so much for PSG. In fact, both teams adopt very fluid systems when in possession, and specifically, they rely on their strikers to drop deep into midfield to outnumber the centre. This player is usually free to pick up the ball and can then help the team gain ground. It was one of the main reasons why Dembélé was so good for PSG last season and ultimately why he won the Ballon d'Or. And it's the main reason why Kane is currently the best striker in European football, picking up the ball directly from the centre-backs and playing it forward into any player running ahead of him thanks to his incredible passing range. But in this game, we instantly saw a big difference in how both teams dealt with the false nine. And from Bayern, we can see the advantage they had by taking a look at their opening goal. It may look like Bayern Munich's pretty standard 4-2-3-1 shape, but there are some subtle rotations that make a huge difference. First, Dembélé is given no space and is followed by the centre-back Tar all the way into midfield. Not worried about breaking the defensive line because every player ahead of him was picked up as well. This was a crucial move as it gave one of PSG's offensive outlets no time on the ball. Then, the back four in this situation is composed of Upamecano, the two fullbacks with Stanisic slightly more central, and the eventual goalscorer Luis Díaz filling in at left back. The only option for PSG appears to be this central pass into Mendes, but this is a perfect pressing trap being deployed by Bayern, and as soon as the pass is made, Upamecano jumps forward and suddenly there are no options to pass into. They regain possession and Analyse is played in behind from Gnabry, only for his shot to be saved with Luis Díaz picking up the loose ball to finish off the move. So Bayern dealt with this rotation from Dembélé by having one of the centre-backs just continuously follow him wherever he went. And because the rest of the team was locked into a man-marking system as well, it meant PSG had very few options to play the ball forward, and were continuously rushing their passes looking to play the ball in behind. Bayern were not fazed at all by these rotations, and we can see for example in this clip as they push forward, the centre-back Upamecano is all the way forward closing down Fabian Ruiz. So there was no specific defensive line they looked to keep. Now, as we mentioned earlier, Bayern Munich also played with a false 9 in Harry Kane, and PSG also looked to press 1-1. But Kane was still able to pick up the ball in space the vast majority of the time in the first half. For example, in this clip, PSG are pressing aggressively, and we can see Kane drop all the way back to pick up the ball. The PSG defender clearly wants to follow him, but is concerned by this run forward from the right back lineman. There's a few reasons why this is happening. First, Kvara is late to pick up Olise, which means the centre-back can't follow this run, which then means there's hesitation from these two players on who needs to cover these movements. So Kane has time to receive the ball and play a pass into Lima, who moves it out wide before nearly resulting in a goal for Bayern. So essentially PSG struggled to find Dembélé because he was consistently followed by the centre-backs, while Bayern were able to build through the lines because Kane dropped deeper and was not followed all the way by the PSG centre-backs, and because Bayern were able to fill the centre with other players rotating forward. Regardless of this, PSG still had the majority of possession in the first half, but struggled to break through. One of the main risks of Bayern's defensive mentality is that all it takes is one player to be beaten and there's a lot of space to attack. For example, in this move with Barcola skipping past Stanisic and rushing forward. And in the 22nd minute, they thought they'd equalised, thanks mostly to a great move from the two wingers in Kvaratskhelia and Barcola. But Dembélé was offside when he taps it into the net, ultimately picking up an injury in this move and being substituted early on. This was the theme for the vast majority of the first half. PSG had the majority of possession, but the press from Bayern Munich made it pretty impossible to pick out any forward options, and PSG were continuously rushing their passes forward. And eventually this press is what led to the goal that made it 2-0. With Luis Díaz picking the ball off Marquinhos right outside the PSG box and finishing neatly past the goalkeeper. But then there was a pretty big turning point in this game, because just as it seemed as if Bayern Munich were going to walk away with this win, Luis Díaz was sent off for a reckless challenge on Hakimi right at the end of the first half, which meant Bayern Munich had to play the whole second half away to PSG down to 10 men. So Kompany had to find a solution. We can see from this very interesting momentum bar that Bayern didn't see much of the ball in the second half. So how did they hold on for 45 minutes against the reigning champions? The first step was to change defensive shape. You can't go man for man when you already have a man disadvantage. So Kompany switched to a rather interesting 4-3-2. I say interesting because this, for me, is relatively uncommon. But with this setup, Bayern were a bit quicker to apply pressure at the back. And if there were gaps in the centre, one of the centre backs would step off their line. We can see early on how they didn't want to concede too much space. They're in a 4-3-2 shape and there is a gap in the centre. But this was filled by Upamecano stepping forward. When PSG pushed further forward, we still saw this gap here. But again, Bayern were quick to close it down. And this shape did transition quickly from a 4-3-2 into a 5-3-1, with the wingers then joining the back line to form a back five. Bayern were doing an excellent job at keeping the ball away from the centre, forcing PSG to rotate from flank to flank and being quick to shield any central progression. And even though PSG had all of the ball, it's difficult to gain a real advantage when the whole team is packed into a space no more than 20 meters long. Eventually, after 30 minutes of slowly chipping away at the defense, PSG found a goal with João Neves getting ahead of Lima and finishing neatly past Neuer. And this upped the pressure on Bayern even more, now holding on any way they could to their 1-goal lead, with PSG pushing more and more players forward. Bayern dropped deeper and deeper and would often end up with 7 or 8 players all on the same line, with PSG overloading the centre and finding runs into the half space. Tactically speaking, there wasn't much more Kompany could do. Barring a few dangerous counterattacks, every time Bayern regained possession, the main objective was to slow down the tempo and kick the ball as far away from their own box as possible. But it never took long before the next wave of PSG attacks came their way. But from PSG's perspective as well, there wasn't much more Luis Enrique could have done. PSG weren't playing badly and were creating some decent opportunities, but were struggling to break past Neuer. And the physical centre-backs of Tah and Upamecano were dealing with the crosses into the box effectively. But eventually, Kompany's men did enough and stuck to their defensive shape for the whole second half and picked up some extremely important 3 points against PSG. And this was undoubtedly a statement win for Bayern Munich and Vincent Kompany, who continue their perfect start to the season. So even though we still find ourselves in the Champions League group stages, this team looks spectacular. And if you want to know more about some of the other reasons why they've been so good this season, then you can check it out in this video here. But let me know what you thought of this game in the comments down below, and do you think Bayern Munich can go all the way in the Champions League? Thanks for watching.